coming up on this week's show, the hottest social media platform comes to MS-DOS.
A PS3 emulator that can boot every game.
And updating your favourite games with James Schall.
And the Retro Hour podcast is brought to you every week with our wonderful friends at Bitmap Books. Now, quick question. Have you got a favourite King of Fighters character? You can check them all out in their book, The King of Fighters, The Ultimate History, officially endorsed by SNK. This amazing 544-page book reveals the history of this much-loved fighter. You can check that out and the rest of their retro gaming books at bitmapbooks.com. Hello and welcome to the Retro Hour podcast, episode number 360. Your weekly dose of retro gaming and technology news with me, Dan Wood.
Me, Ravi Abbott.
And me, Joe Fox.
And a very warm welcome to the podcast that every single Friday takes you on a nostalgic trip back in time to the golden age of video games. And of course, brings you up to speed on all the current happenings in the world of retro and brings you a very special guest on for an interview each week as well. Now, quick reminder to myself here, Joe, I'm actually going to edit in the Xbox 360 startup sound just into the intro there because you asked me to do that and I forgot to download it. So
I thought we're going to miss a trick if we don't put the 360 noise in there, the startup noise or something. But that's the one. But is 360 retro? Because we're covering the PS3.
Oh god!
Of course it is. But it's a weird console, isn't it? Like 360. What an odd name that was. Like, was it because of extreme sports or something?
I don't know. We always thought like I don't know where this came from, but I remember me and my friends saying because it was an all-around console because it could play DVDs and all this, but so could have, like, the generation before could do that. So I don't know where that came from.
You know, people used to put like 2000 in front of names. That's what maybe the Xbox 2000 would have been cooler.
Yeah, maybe.
You know, it's weird, isn't it? Because, yeah, you're right. And particularly from the mid-90s onwards, everything was like 2K or 2000 to appear like next century. To me, like, seeing 2000 in front of something still sounds futuristic. Even though it was totally. 23 years ago. So,
Dan Wood 2000.
So, yeah, this is not an Xbox 360 episode, although, I mean, yeah, I think you opened a bit of a can of worms there, Joe. It does kind of feel like now, because, I mean, God, in like 2 years' time, the 360 will be 20 years old. So it just kind of feel like we're edging towards that being retro.
I know, 3 years off that being 20 years old. We also, last week, which we forgot to mention, celebrated our 7-year anniversary, and somebody actually commented on, I did a post on social media saying, like, we're 7 years old, you know, thank you to everybody who stuck with us for those 7 years. And somebody put, are you guys retro now? So maybe another 7 years and we will be.
I guess if
the way my back feels would suggest I am pretty retro.
If someone had a child and they called them the Retro Hour, they'd be 7 years old now. God.
Oh, wow. Such a weird way to put it.
Yeah, Joe tried to convince his wife she wasn't having it. So thank you very much. I think we're all still a bit hungover from Christmas last week. We completely forgot it was our birthday, but 7 years of doing this show, and still it does feel like retro is just getting bigger and bigger every year that we do this. And you know, there were some people that thought we'd maybe get 10 episodes out of this and then we'd run out of guests. But in fact, we still keep getting on these amazing guests each week. And actually today is a very interesting one because we're kind of bridging, you know, kind of modern gaming and retro gaming with someone who's been responsible for bringing back and updating a lot of the classic games from back in the 80s and 90s to current platforms.
Yeah, we're talking with James Schall, and this is a really interesting interview because, you know, back in the days, you used to kind of distribute stuff with cartridges and cases and manuals and all of those kind of things. But digital distribution has become a huge area. And James was actually the product marketing manager and VP of digital distribution at Sega. So he was behind all of those kind of, you know, great titles that came out like Sonic Mania, Sonic Generations, but also the Total War series, which was really cool. He also worked at Amazon as well, so he was in the games department at Amazon back in the days in some 90s video game stores as well, so we have a bit of memories of, like, you know, Virgin Games and stuff like that. But he's now working with Secret Mode Limited, and they've actually just done Zool Redimensioned, which is a kind of new take on the old Zool world. And I love these kind of titles, like especially Sonic Mania and Generations. We know how well they went, and they were just complete like remakes, but in older style. You know, they were reimagined kind of versions of Sonic. It's really interesting.
Yeah, and they brought kind of the classic gameplay back, and I've got to say, probably the only 2 Sonic games I've probably really liked in the last 10 years. I mean, I did get hold of Sonic Frontiers for the Switch. I've played it, it's all right. Modern Sonic, though, I don't know, they just don't seem to be able to get it right. But when they do the retro-inspired titles, like, I don't know if you guys played Generations, thought that was fantastic. And I know we're all big fans of Sonic Mania. So it's interesting that it just kind of feel like, the retro titles are where they really do nail it.
Well, Sega have been doing a lot of this. So, he talks about Shenmue 1 and 2 as well. Company of Heroes, they were re-releasing. They've been going back to a lot of their old brands and kind of bringing them up and having a few updates, like Castles of Illusion as well with Mickey Mouse.
I love the fact you mentioned that you worked at Virgin Megastore back in the day as well. I'm interested in some memories about that.
Yeah, Virgin Games were huge,
Yeah, I mean, I saw a picture on Instagram the other day, and I'd forgotten just how cool those shops were. Made me really nostalgic for it, those classic 90s gaming shops. And I actually, we went to a gaming market in Nottingham, didn't we, just before Christmas, where we did a panel, and then Joe and I little wander around. I did my usual thing of buying old gaming magazines, the ones that I threw out about 10 years ago that I've started buying again. And inside one of those was some vouchers for Future Zone.
Oh, yeah.
Wow. Did you send them off?
I remember that. Unfortunately, they expired in, I think it was February 1994. So,
I think,
try my luck.
Like Virgin do all the internet. Why don't they get some of their old game brands and then do a game streaming service on the Virgin internet? Yeah. It's like, that would be fantastic.
Yeah, so always love talking to people that worked in game shops back in the day. So going to be a really interesting chat with our guest this week, James Schall. He'll be on the show in around half an hour from now. Before that, let's hop into some of the big headlines from over the last week, and been lots of news stories coming out of CES. Now, of course, that was on over the weekend, and this is kind of the Consumer Electronics Show where
it's not called that anymore. It's just called CES. Weirdly,
yeah, it used to stand for Consumer. Yeah,
Electronics they just dropped that, and now it just went for CES. It's a weird move.
Yeah, so this is usually though where they show off the hot new hardware, but I think in recent years it does feel like there's been more retro stuff coming out.
Well, also there's been more tats. Like before CES, CES used to be like the huge show, and now Apple and people like that, they do their own kind of shows and their own launches. So CES is now weird products, tat, stuff like mind-reading exercise bike devices, strange stuff, but also, like you said, retro games have started to find their way in there.
Now, this was quite an interesting announcement that Atari, last week we were talking about how they'd cancelled their manufacturing contract, we'd heard, with the company that were making the Atari VCS, and we kind of speculated. You said, I hope that doesn't put them off making any more consoles, and I was like, oh, it definitely will. And then as soon as we'd recorded that, an announcement came out that they're working with a company who are actually well known for doing these kind of retro consoles. This is a company called My Arcade.
Have you heard of them before? I haven't. I've heard of 1UP and stuff, but I know there's lots of these little like kind of arcade, licensed devices out there and stuff.
I think I've seen some of the handhelds before. I remember the Gallagher one. I've not seen them in person. I've just read about them online. But yeah, they're a company like that who basically they license various different games and collections. Did like a Data East mini arcade recently. There's a Street Fighter 2 one. We've got a Gallagher one as well, a Pac-Man 40th anniversary player, Space Invaders one. So these are really all the same hardware, just, different
They've got
games
some cool retro stuff as well. So they've got like actual cartridge converters and stuff, and stuff for the original consoles as well. Yeah,
so they've been at CES over the weekend, and apparently they've announced, now we've only got images of a couple of these, and the announcements admittedly are not that in depth, but it looks like we're going to be getting 3 new systems that are made by My Arcade with Atari games and licensing on there, and it looks like these are part of the Atari 50th anniversary celebrations.
Yeah, so like you said, there's going to be 3. So there's the My Arcade Atari Micro Player, which is like like you say, it's one of those kind of tabletop arcade machines, like mini arcade machines, and And like you say, nothing's really been announced other than mock-up images. So there's been no kind of like physical pictures of this or anything like that. And, it kind of comes back to what Ravi was saying about like CES and how it's changed so much. Like back in the day, you would actually get like a prototype of this, you would see like, kind of like 3D print, not 3D printed, but 3D models of it and stuff, actual physical models or an actual functioning prototype, where it's all just images, isn't it, at the moment, Ravi?
Yeah, and they seem like rendered. Looking at it, Yeah.
Just rendered images. So you got the My Arcade Atari Micro Player, which is a tabletop arcade machine.
And to be fair, like I said, they've made a lot of these cabinets. So literally it's just going to be a case of putting the ROMs on, changing the artwork on it,
like reskinning it,
Yeah. So I can't see why that wouldn't come out.
No.
I mean, it makes sense that, it's an easy job.
Yeah. And then there's the My Arcade Atari Pocket Player, which is a little bit kind of like the Evercade, one of these little handhelds, kind of 2 buttons with a start and select button and a D-pad. Like you say, something they've made a lot of in the past. Yeah. And then the last one, which is the only thing that's actually been acknowledged by Atari, the only one that they've actually like retweeted themselves on social media and stuff, is the Game Station Plus, the My Arcade Atari Game Station Plus, which is the one which does, to be fair, look really nice. It's I guess, a modern take of the Atari 2600. It's
I don't like the joysticks. They look really weird. They look like e-cigarettes.
Yeah, they do actually, now you say that. But I think it looks like what you would have thought the Atari 2600 would look like in the future.
It's a weird name as well.
70s,
it? Game Station, because those are the devices that, Ashen's reviews, which usually they're cheap Chinese knockoffs.
Or it was a shop. We're talking about Game Shop.
Oh, yeah.
It was a
Game Station. Yeah.
So, there really isn't much information about them. It's all speculation. Atari have clarified that the Game Station will have 2600 games and 7800 games in Atari arcade games. Initially, just looking at these, like they all say Atari 50 on them and stuff, I thought it was going to have the Atari 50 on them. And I was like, oh, that's really cool. Like, it's going to have like all those games from the Jaguar and stuff like that on them. But speculation, I know it's all very much speculation, but these kind of like micro player arcades and pocket players, they tend to only have like 10 to 20 games on them. They've not announced anything like that yet, but I've got a feeling it isn't going to be Atari 50 running on these.
No, I think that, licensing, they've probably just said, okay, yeah, go ahead. And then the guys have paid a fee and that'll be it. Just like with the Atari collection on the Evercade, it would have just been a simple move. They do that and then manufacturing happens. The same with like the hotel and all of the other kind of mad stuff that Atari were just licensing. Yeah.
I guess that's the difference. I mean, the VCS console, the VCS 2020, having a lot of people refer to it online, was something that Atari actually themselves were manufacturing.
Yeah.
Whereas this, you're right, My Arcade are making the hardware. So it means, I guess there's no kind of risk to Atari. But I did say last week, when I was talking about, the fact that they're saying that they're not making any more of the Atari VCS 2020s, that it would be a good idea if they just did like an Atari 2600 mini console, which there's been attempts at, the flashbacks and stuff in the past. But actually this Game Station Plus does feel a bit like that, doesn't it? Something that's probably going to hook up to, I'm pretty certain it's going to have HDMI out. It looks like it's got
It looks like a Steam Link kind of in size and scale.
Yeah, it's a small little
or like
slab
a battery pack, Yeah.
Yeah, I don't know how big it's. Looking at the joysticks next to it, if they're the same kind of size as the original 2600 joysticks, it's shown with them. It looks like there's 2 wireless joysticks with a couple of extra buttons. Looks like they've got a trigger on the stick as well, and a button on top of them too. So it looks like the 3-button joysticks, and then a few little buttons on the back of it that I guess is going to be for kind of going to the home screen and selecting different games. And then on the hardware itself, it kind of looks like the size of maybe a DVD case, maybe a bit smaller.
Yeah,
that kind of form factor though. And then you've got what appears to be a power button on the top and a home button. So, and the Atari logo kind of recessed in silver on the side of it. So I've got to say, design-wise, I think it looks really nice, and definitely a nice way to play the classic Atari games. So it does feel like this is just a kind of very cool-looking mini console, really.
Yeah, I think this is cool, and Atari have done this for years, haven't they? Like, I don't know how many collections of remastered Atari titles I've bought through different consoles and Steam and stuff like that. But I've never heard of this company before, so if any of the listeners have actually had an experience with them, drop in the comments, because you had a flashback, didn't you? What was it like?
I've got one. I mean, I've got to say, I'm not the biggest kind of aficionado of, old school Atari games. I felt like they ran all right on that. It was just kind of what you'd expect, really. It was a cheap kind of device. I mean, 2,600 games are not the most demanding in the world.
And I saw them everywhere, to be fair. They were on sale in shops all over and everything.
Yes, I mean, it did the job if you want to play 2,600 games. Personally, they don't really hold my attention all that well. Atari 2600 games, I feel like they're just a little bit too simplistic. I did get the Atari 50 collection, and for me, I mean, there's some Jaguar games on there that run really nicely. Obviously, I've got a Jaguar original and the original games, but for me, the appeal of having the Atari 50 collection was the bonus movies that were on there as well, and the little mini documentaries, and the way it was presented. There's a lot of artwork and concepts and stuff in there as well. So that really felt like a nice celebration of classic Atari up until the mid-90s, whereas just having a device that's going to play like Missile Command and Pong, for me, doesn't really hold all that much interest, if I'm honest.
Say that and you'll get it next Christmas.
yeah, my wife will be ordering it now for my birthday. But, I mean, it does look a cool little device. I mean, the speculation is that this is literally going to be, I think most people are quite excited about the Game Station Plus over the other ones. But I've got a feeling, that there's an article on Retro Dodo where they're saying, they don't think it's going to have the storefront on there that the VCS 2020 has. You're probably not going to be able to download games.
Yeah, because even if you did have the storefront, I don't think this would be capable of playing quite a few of the titles that were on the VCS.
Yeah, so I imagine it's very simplistic hardware. But, I think, for Atari fans, we did talk last week that we know from what we've seen, they only sold about 10,000 of the recent Atari VCS. I've got a feeling these will be a lot cheaper and probably sell a lot better.
Yeah.
So, I mean, it does feel like a step in the right direction for them, and obviously working with a company who've got a track record of doing successfully these kind of mini consoles and collections. So, it feels like a step in the right direction. So we'll keep an eye on that. And if you want to read everything we know so far, I'll link that article up in our show notes at theretrohour.com. Now, a couple of really cool fan projects that we've seen over the last couple of months. I don't know if you spotted this. Turrican 2 has had quite a nice upgrade on the Amiga using some of the MS-DOS assets.
Oh, God, the PC version. The PC version's really good, actually. And this seems like a nice, well thought out update, actually. So you can play the PC DOS version on the Amiga then of Turrican 2.
Yeah, and I think the, obviously, MS-DOS back in the day, I think the MS-DOS version of Turrican 2 came out later than the Amiga, and it had 256 colours in there.
Yeah.
Which obviously gives the game, visually a really big upgrade. And someone's actually done, this is an unofficial fan project on sonicslothgames.h.io. It's called Turrican 2 AGA. So really, I mean, I've read a bit about how he's done this. He's basically coded kind of a lot of the game engine from scratch, and it's not associated with Factor 5 in any way. It's not for sale. This is an unofficial remake. But basically, he's took, all the nice graphics and the upgraded parallax scrolling from the more advanced MS-DOS version from back in the day and backported that to the Amiga, the AGA Amigas. So obviously, the Amiga 1200 and the CD32 had more colours than the Amiga 500.
It does it in 24-bit as well, which is really interesting to see. And it does look coded really well. Like some of the options in there. One thing that really impressed me was the music improvements. So Amiga's always struggled with sound effects. And
I was
music.
going to ask that because of when it comes to Turrican, I've only played the console ports of it, like Mega Drive and SNES and stuff, and it has such a good soundtrack. So I was curious how that soundtrack was.
But it's banging on the Amiga, absolutely banging.
It's Chris Hall's making it.
Yeah, but because you've got 4 channels, when there's sound effects and too much going on screen and stuff, there can be like cutouts and stuff. Yeah. So I think they've improved that element of it, but the music is like completely. The Amiga music sends shivers up my spine. It's so good.
Yeah. I mean, it's generally regarded as one of the best Amiga soundtracks, isn't it, Turrican 2?
Yeah, and it does run on the A500 Mini as well, which I think is really interesting.
Yeah,
that's the thing. So, I mean, even though that's called the A500, really, it can run Amiga 1200 games as well.
But also, this needs that boost. So, the A500 Mini has the extra RAM in there. You're going to need 8 meg of fast to run this on here. The floppy version you run 2 meg. fast, but still you need that upgrade. You won't be able to play it on like a kind of raw machine. But one thing I love as well is that the main sprite of the Turrican dude, you can actually change out to the Amiga one. So you can have all the backgrounds and the enhancements and all the music and everything, but still have that Amiga sprite that you used to.
Oh, that makes sense, because on the website there's got the two different sprites running along, and I don't know what was that. I didn't know why there was two. I like that. I love that, actually.
Yeah, so will be people that want that in there. And I mean, he's done some nice, modern enhancements as well. 2-button joysticks are supported. You've got CD32 joypads. You can define the controls yourself, change the difficulty mode. There's a trainer built into it too. There's like an option he's put in there to look down so you can see blind jumps. It was always, something that would catch you out in the original Turrican as well.
It's pretty amazing. I'm reading, like, someone says, like, how did you actually do this? And he said, I rewrote the code from scratch, attempting to recreate the original code as close to possible by just playing the original and watching long play videos. So he didn't have any access to the original source code. He just rebuilt it from long plays. And I just think that's wow.
Yeah, that is a big wow. That's the only way to describe it. Really impressive.
So that's fine. You can download that for free as well, if you want to play that on your A500 Mini or your Amiga 1200. So, top marks for that. Actually, while we're talking of fan projects that are impressive as well, this is just a very basic demo. Have you seen Star Fox running on the Sega Mega Drive?
I have, and I can't quite get my head around it. So this is from, I'm going to say this wrong, Gas68K, who's got a version of Star Fox running on a Mega Drive, apparently on original hardware. So it's missing quite a bit. It's missing quite a few enemies and stuff like that. But in terms of graphically, kind of in the frame rate and everything like that, it looks fine, doesn't it? It looks great.
Bearing in mind that the Super Nintendo version relied on the power of the Super FX chip, and you haven't got that in the Mega Drive.
Yeah.
That to me is pretty jaw-dropping how well it's running.
Yeah, absolutely. And it even states here, no, there's no Super FX chip here. It's all, Mega Drive Genesis, baby. Like I say, lack of enemies at the moment, so it's kind of like a concept.
The big story is the frame rate is running great.
Yeah. I guess, like the particles as well, they won't have so many particles and stuff. Like from the video that I'm seeing, there's not like, when there's explosions, bits come off and stuff like that. That's going to be really, really hard to do.
Yeah,
it's kind of like just the basic ship, quite low down at the moment.
Yeah, it's just, kind of like the first level with the little intro. Like you say, the ship kind of flying along, one or two enemies knocking about, and then the, kind of all the buildings, the pillars and stuff are coming in, and you can shoot and everything like that. So, if you were to kind of glance at this and look at it, you'd just be like, yeah, that's Star Fox. And it's just, you wouldn't question that it was Star Fox.
Yeah, the draw distance seems a bit short as well, but you've got to compensate for, not having that Super FX chip in there.
It's, certainly not far off the Super Nintendo at all.
You know what? What's amazing though as well? I love it when you see games that were kind of system sellers for certain consoles back in the day running on their kind of arch rivals.
Yeah.
It's always a bit bizarre, isn't it? If you see like Sonic running on like a Super Nintendo or something, it's like, what?
Yeah, 32 years later, but it's still impressive to us.
Still blows my mind. So it proves that, maybe blast processing was up there with the Super FX chip. It's got it built in the Mega Drive. So that'll start a few wars. So if you want to check out that so far, and obviously a story that we'll keep an eye on, I'll put both of those in our show notes too. And now let's talk about a little update to a story that we covered before Christmas, and this is the MSX Zero, a handheld computer. Now we've had a first look at this.
Yeah, so they're reintroducing a range of these MSX machines. It's actually by the MSX co-creator, and this is the handheld version. It looks quite interesting. This is something that I've not seen before, and it's based on a microcontroller for the Internet of Things. So, the Internet of Things is this kind of have the whole world connected, have like your doorbell, your light bulb, and all of that kind of connected.
Oh, tell me, if my internet goes down, I can't turn my lights on.
Well, this MSX is based on this kind of stacking system, which I found quite an interesting concept. We've only seen a picture of it. And it's called M5 Stack. I've not really heard much about it until I've looked into this, but it looks like a Game Boy, but the options are interchangeable. So
it reminds me of something you'd see in a warehouse more, like a stock controller.
It does look industrial, doesn't it? Yeah.
Once upon a time, there was a summer when I was 18 and I did stock control overnight in warehouses. And now you have just said that, it's all come flooding back down. It looks just like it with the keypad. You're not wrong.
Did they tease you in the warehouse?
No.
He was trying to play Tetris on it, that's why.
No, this does look interesting though, because these modules apparently have all different functions in them. So let me try and describe it. It's kind of like a Game Boy mixed with a modern thermostat or something that would work like wirelessly. And then you can pull out the keyboard, and now the keyboard in it looks, I don't know, it doesn't look like the most comfortable thing, does it?
No, very, very label maker or something like that, isn't it?
Yeah, but it's got like USB-C power at the bottom, and then you've got another M5 stack unit, which is it's got the D-pad, A and B, start and select as well. So you can rip that off and then put it in. It reminds me of a console, handheld device that I used to have years ago called the Pocket Chip, which was kind of this concept, but you'd build it yourself. So they kind of gave it, and they said, if you want speakers, you open it up and you install your own speakers. And the keyboard was awful on that, but people used to like 3D print overlays on it and stuff. This looks really basic. Looking at the kind of commands at the top as well, it does look like they're just using the industrial unit. I was looking at it. Interestingly, it has 3 axis gyroscopes in there as well. So that might be able to be used within like the gaming and stuff. It does look like an interesting concept, and I guess the MSX, it's like some people used it as a computer, some people used it as just a gaming machine. So I guess having this keyboard and this swapping functionality, I can just imagine though going on holiday and being like, oh man, I really need my keyboard to save this game or something like that, and I've left it in the car or something like that.
Using a text adventure on it on the beach.
Yeah.
Yeah, I think you're right though, because to me, the MSX, it was a range of computers really, so not having, the QWERTY keyboard on that would limit it quite a bit. But it is cool that you can kind of just swap it out for what is really a D-pad, isn't it? You can take the keyboard out and interchange it for when you're doing some hardcore gaming on it. Yeah, I've got to say, I don't think it's the most attractive looking thing in the world. It is very industrial.
It's very
looking,
prototypey at the moment, isn't it?
Yeah. And it might change, but I think, having basically a handheld MSX is very cool. The MSX is not something that I've had a lot of experience with. I think the closest I ever came, I had an MSX emulator on the Amiga back in the day that I used to load up a few games, but not having any kind of references to how they ran on the original hardware. I wasn't sure whether it ran very well or not, but it's definitely a platform that I've always had a bit of an interest in. So, if the price was right, this could be something.
It's pretty fun, this M5 stack thing. I'm just looking into it at the moment. You can get cameras that you could add on there, video cameras, but also you could add it onto a robot. So you can have a robot with wheels, that goes around the house. So you could maybe get your MSX, plug it into a robot, and then game with it like that. Who knows? There's a load of possibilities using this system. It seems
the camera sounds very cool.
Yeah, well thought out.
So yeah, nice little update on that. So we'll keep an eye on it, and all the rest of the stories as well. You can find them in your show notes each week, and I put them on our website at theretrohour.com. Quick reminder before we talk about this PlayStation 3 emulator update and our special guest James Schall coming up in just a moment. The reason the Retro Hour comes out every Friday is thanks to you, our wonderful community of patrons who support the show, allow us to keep bringing out new episodes. And I mean, you did mention that it's been our 7th birthday in the last couple of weeks. That does mean all of our costs are due this month. Website hosting, renewal, audio, all of that comes out this month. So a very good time if you can support the podcast. It all really helps us out. And of course, we're not all take. We give a lot back to our community, don't we, Joe?
We do try to give back. So every month we do the Retro Hour After Hours, which we've now done 29 episodes of, I think. Which
is just 30 coming up.
30 coming up, big 3-0 coming up, which we'll be doing at the end of this month. Usually we kind of give a bit of an insight on kind of like on our lives and our opinions on, our favourite consoles, favourite games for systems. We go back in time and kind of discuss years and the highlights of some years in the 80s, the 90s. We covered the 2000s for quite a while, which was really fun. And then, of course, one of my favourite things that I like to do with the patrons, which I like to do with my friends, if you will, is our hangout that we do on Google Meets on the final Sunday of every month. So we'll be doing that on the 29th this month, where we kind of have a virtual hangout. We all have a bit of a drink. We all just kind of talk about retro stuff, talk about what we've all been up to, showing off, what we've been buying. I really love it when we had an instance once where somebody actually had a motherboard from a system and they didn't know what it was. And we all sat around discussing it, trying to figure out what it was for
ages. I like when someone says like, oh, I used to work in that job in the 90s. And then suddenly there's like two people like, oh, yeah, we were both engineers in networking or something. And
exactly.
The chat goes into like total obscure directions. I love that, yeah.
And I was chatting to one of our patrons there, Rich, who he came on to show us his Games Master Golden Joystick once, and he heard us talking about the new one last week, and now he's just bought a new one.
Nice.
So he said he's going to hop on end of the month to show that off as well.
Falling into
you managed to sell your new one then, Dan.
I wish I had a new one. Yeah, I mean, it's just a great little community that we've got surrounding this show, and we'd love you to join us as well. And of course, for supporting us on Patreon, you will get a mention in the most prestigious high score table in the world of retro, and that is the Retro Hour Hall of Fame.
Hall of Fame!
And let's induct our latest members into the Hall of Fame.
Welcome, Akugu.
And Neil Toms,
who both backed us on Patreon over the last week. Your support is massively appreciated. And if you'd like to do the same, all the details to support us on Patreon are on our website at theretrohour.com. And actually, our patrons get a couple of exclusive news stories every week as well. So those are coming up very soon. For everybody else, let's talk about this. Now, this is a PlayStation 3 emulator that, again, I mean, we kind of talked about at the start of the show that the 360 is kind of getting into retro now. Obviously, the PlayStation 3... only a few years away from being 20 as well, even though to me, I was showing you guys the other day, my missus works in a charity shop, and she came home with a new PlayStation 3 that she'd, an old PlayStation 3 that looked brand new, actually, that had been donated to the shop because she's not allowed to sell electronics. And she said, well, I know someone that would like this. And the guy's like, yeah, I just want rid of it. She brought it home. And to me, getting a PS3, I mean, it was one of the fat 80 gig PS3s, which, I've already got one, but not the most reliable systems in the world. So it's nice to have a backup. But it still feels like, a premium kind of new console.
I've never used one, so it's totally modern to me.
It's not, to me, it's really it plays Blu-rays, it's got wireless controllers, it's HDMI, you've got 1080p games on there. And a lot of the games, I mean, you think back, a lot of the games that we get now are really just a lot of kind of updates and re-releases of games that originally came out on like the PS3 and the 360. I mean, how many times has Grand Theft Auto 5 come out now? Like 3 generations? I think that's
GTA 5, The Last of Us.
Yeah.
So many of these games are getting re-released and stuff like that. Because
one prediction,
they are
quickly. I'm just going to do a quick prediction. GTA 6 will drop this year. That's my prediction. It's going to totally fail.
I don't know.
I need to do one in January.
So, to me, that's the thing. The PlayStation 3 still feels kind of, even though, people are considering it, moving into retro now, still feels like, a comparable modern gaming experience. So the fact that there is now a pretty decent PlayStation 3 emulator, that at this stage, this is the update, that it can now boot every single PlayStation 3 game. Now, this is an emulator that's been around for a while. It's called RPCS3. But obviously emulating the PlayStation with its cell architecture, it was quite a complicated machine.
I think PS2, the emulation scene's great, and the PS2 emulators are so powerful with all the extra features you can add in there and upscaling and stuff like that. I guess, yeah, you're right, the cell processors must have been a bit of a headache to kind of, get your head around for emulator developers.
Well, that was one of the things that, when the original PS3 came out, nobody thought it was going to be a success because obviously it was priced a lot higher than the 360. But a lot of developers were looking at it like trying to get their head around the architecture.
It's like PowerPC multi-core, isn't it? It's a really weird kind of architecture.
It's kind of designed for it. Weirdly, I've kind of been, when I got my new PS3, I've been watching a load of PS3 documentaries and videos on YouTube. And there's one really interesting one talking about how, the PS3 has definitely become a fan favorite in the retro community now, but originally it wasn't. And it kind of talks about all the complexities and the cell processor, how it was really made for a lot of kind of industrial use as well as gaming and, supercomputing, really. So it's cool that they've got this emulator that now can boot at least all of these games. Now, the saying that it's not going to run all of them flawlessly.
Yeah.
But I think it is a decent number, though. They've got
yeah, so I was going to say boot is the key word there. So when I first saw this article, I thought it meant, I kind of read it and was like, oh my God, like 100% of the PS3 games can be emulated now. But what they're saying is it like you say, it's booting them up. So as it stands, 67.98% of the games are completely playable and can be completed with no performance issues or game-breaking glitches. And I'd like to point out as well, I don't know what the size of the PS3's game library is, but I imagine pretty huge, kind of by that generation. I'm pretty sure consoles are in the kind of like 10,000s games, like tens of
2,561.
How many
games,
was it?
apparently.
2,000?
2,561.
Oh, okay, a lot less than I thought. In-game, 28.59%. Games can either can't be finished or have serious glitches or insufficient performances. 3.42% of the games that display the image but don't make it past the menu. But then 0% of the games display a black screen and 0% of the games do not initialize. So pretty much what they're saying is almost 70% of the games are completely playable. And,
yeah, which is good. That's
really
a good metric, yeah. And that's, the PS3, a complicated machine to emulate, but I think having nearly 70% of the library playable on a PC emulator, I love the fact as well that so far they've been left alone by Sony.
So far.
By the looks of it. Yeah, haven't done a Nintendo, because, I did see, it mentions in this article on Game Rant that, there was a Steam Deck video showing Switch emulation, which, there are some good Switch emulators out there. Don't take us down, Nintendo. But Valve actually deleted that video showing it because Nintendo's lawyers are straight.
I think emulating a console that's currently on sale is a bit more risky than one that's quite old, And
we keep hearing these rumours that, PS3 emulation's coming to the PS5. That's something that keeps being talked about, which would make sense. Because, at the moment, that is one reason that I actually have still got my PlayStation 3 hooked up. But, my Xbox One consoles aren't, because, my Series X can play all the back catalogue and a lot of the 360 games. But obviously that's a big problem for PlayStation fans. You really need the older system still set up if you want to play those games. But actually this is a great way, if you're going to be able to play 70% of the library on your PC, I think that's a pretty good compromise. So, definitely worth checking that out if you've got a PlayStation 3 collection and no way of playing the original games again, or you want a bit of nostalgia, or if you like Ravi, you've never played a PS3, you just want to kind of check out some of its library, a really good way of doing it. So
now I need a PC.
Yeah, you've only got a Mac now, haven't you? Yeah, I forgot about that. It's always something, isn't there, Ravi? So, if you want to check this out, the emulator's called RPCS3, and I'll link up this article in our show notes as well. Now, just one quick story before we chat to James Schall, our special guest. Obviously, social media is one of the biggest things in the world today. It's really depressing. I work for a company where I do a lot of social media management. I have for a long time. There's a girl who works with us who's, I think she's 22, and she referred to Facebook the other day as a boomer book. And she goes, it's weird to take this job, I had to sign up to boomer book. Because, she's under 30. No one under 30 uses Facebook.
My wife actually said yesterday that, who's 34 now, so she's not under 30, but she said she has come off Instagram because she doesn't like it and she only uses Facebook now. And I was like, oh God, we're old.
But yeah, even, we've had stuff like, Ravi's been off Facebook. You don't use it that
I
much.
don't use Facebook. I don't use any of them. Twitter, none of that anymore. Maybe Discord. Discord's very nice because it feels a bit more like IRC or a forum. But this one that we're on about, Mastodon, I have not got a clue about it. And to be honest, I'm not really a fan of social media anymore. It's just people moaning, isn't it?
Well, there was a bit of a mass exodus off Twitter when Elon Musk took over it. And, a lot of people were kind of looking for a new home. But this is actually quite interesting. Now, I've got a Mastodon account. I haven't used it all that much, but I was actually talking about it on our Discord.
What's it like?
With a few people. So really, it's the interesting thing, I think, for retro fans is that it's really, you host your own server. So really, in many ways, it's a bit like a bulletin board.
Okay, but do you get hammered if your server gets really popular? Do you have to pay?
I'm not too sure about that, how you host the servers or anything. That's all a little bit beyond me.
The name always makes me laugh because it sounds like a Depeche Mode song or something. Mastodon,
But really, I mean, it's kind of something that's very hyped at the moment. It only came out in November last year, this platform publicly. I think it's still invite only. You've got to kind of apply for an invitation. I've spoke to a lot of people. I said, I've got an account. I've logged in, looked at it. That was it, really. You've got to pick a server that you join. But actually, the servers can be interconnected. So either you can run an independent server or you can connect it to kind of other ones around the world.
Okay.
So kind of like FidoNet was back in the day with BBSs, I guess. But this, the reason it's of interest to us is that now you can run a Mastodon client on MS-DOS, which I think is very cool. Now, this is a project which is called Dostodon, and it's by a guy called Superlou, who's put this on GitHub, because that's one thing about Mastodon. It's an open source platform. So it means, stuff like this can be easily done. There's no kind of problems with doing it. And this actually runs on real hardware. Now, obviously, you're going to need an old PC with a networking card in there. And they're saying that really this requires a Pentium 133 or faster. You need 32 megs of RAM as well. So quite demanding for MS-DOS, actually. I mean, you're not going to run this on a 386 or a 486 by the sounds of it. But you can check out some of the screenshots in here as well. And it's definitely got that kind of old school kind of ASCII look to it.
I think it's interesting because, you're right. It does need quite a powerful machine to do this. But also it needs JavaScript as well, which I was thinking like, could this be done on the Amiga or something like that? I was like, not with the Java support on the Amiga. So this looks like it's a very DOS thing, but cool that it can run on old hardware as well. I find that really cool. And it runs within, the command line of DOS.
Yeah, it is very good. And, I'm looking through the kind of general and the limitations and stuff in the GitHub as well. By the sounds of it, it is quite complex to get it kind of up and running, and there is going to be a lot of waiting, for it to do stuff. Of course, it's, and there's a lot of limitations, like two-factor support's not enabled. You haven't got SSL certificates, all that kind of thing. So
maybe you could use your... what was it, the SX64 with two-factor, and then you could have that next to your DOS Mastodon account. Yeah,
there's no emoji support or anything. I mean, it's early days in this too. I mean, I imagine there is, more stuff they can add to it. But I've got a Twitter client that runs on the Amiga, which, I've used to tweet a couple of times. It's not the most comfortable thing to use. But again, like a lot of the things we talk about on this podcast, it exists because it can.
Yeah, exactly. It's kind of fun that somebody's doing that, and if you're into that stuff, then I'm sure you'll enjoy it. But you're right. Without the certificates and the kind of verification and stuff like that, it's a bit like you're probably gonna have to run a sketchy instance without two-factor authentication. Go on there basically unsecure, but that used to happen a lot. Remember when people would go on the Amiga internet and stuff, and they'd rip out all of the security features just to be able to visit a website, or they'd be on the wireless network and it would just be a really small password or something like that.
I remember using, there was an old email client that I used, and I tried to log into my Gmail, and I had to turn all my two-factor off on that and everything as well. And which I've since put back on.
So be a bit careful if you're using this.
I wouldn't use your main account. Maybe set a little burner account up just to play with it. So very cool that it exists though. So if you want to do the hottest social media platform on your old MS-DOS machine, there is now a way. So I'll put that in there. All the rest of the stories, you'll find them in our show notes every week on your podcast app or at theretrohour.com. Now, just a quick reminder before we chat to our special guest this week, we do love reviews on Apple Podcasts or Google or Spotify, wherever you can leave a review. I was checking Apple Podcasts. I think the last review we got on there was back in November.
Oh, wow. Yeah, it'd be good to have a few new ones if you can, guys. That would really help out.
Yeah. Gives a little 5-star rating on there. If you can leave a few nice words, that always helps us get in front of new people as well, pushes up the podcast charts, makes new people see the show. So if you do get a couple of minutes and you'd like to support the show, that's a good way of doing it. Leave us a nice little review on your favourite podcast app. And enjoy this week's special guest while you're doing it, talking about remaking and updating classic games, bringing back franchises from back in the day, a few retro game store memories as well, with James Schall, our special guest, next on the Retro Hour podcast. You're listening to the Retro Hour podcast, and it is time for the best bit of the show when we welcome on this week's very special guest, to get some stories about their time working in the industry, the incredible games they worked on. And everyone's got a different story. And actually today, we're really excited to hear some stories about being the marketing manager and VP of digital distribution at Sega, Secret Mode Limited. You remember that Zulri Dimension game that came out last year? And some memories of game shops in Britain back in the 90s with our special guest, James Schall. Welcome to the show, James.
Thank you very much. Good to be here. Excited about the next hour.
Yeah, really appreciate you coming on and taking the time to do a bit of reminiscing with us. And I know you've listened to the podcast before, so you kind of know how this works.
Yeah,
So,
definitely. You guys helped me through lockdown. You're one of the choice podcasts as I was walking the empty roads of Britain, as we couldn't do anything else. But yeah, you're definitely a podcast of choice. Know your voices well. And I certainly got some hints and tips on setting up Secret Mode from many of your esteemed guests.
Fantastic. Well, obviously we'll get into Secret Mode because huge fan of the work you've been doing there. But kind of going back to day one, I mean, we always like to get a bit of, the geek credentials of our guest and find out kind of where it all began. So, do you remember what initially got you into video games then, kind of where it all started for you?
Yeah, definitely. The passion came, I think my dad brought home a Pong variant in the early 70s. I'm a child of Pong. And it had a couple of modes on it, which were volleyball and football and things like that. And I remember thinking, you could move stuff on the telly. This is good. And I think I was about 6 or 7 when we upgraded to an Intellivision. And I just fell in love with the Intellivision. And my mum and dad had just divorced. I spent a lot of time with my dad, and we just played ice hockey on the Intellivision over and over and over again, and loved every minute of it. And through there, I remember him taking me to a video game shop. I think it was Hamleys, downstairs in Hamleys. We're from Oxford, so it was a bit of a journey to go there. And he bought a ZX Spectrum, and I can still smell the polystyrene, on the box.
Yeah.
And a Tic Tac. And then from there, I was totally hooked. ST, Amiga, Commodore. And then I was lucky enough to get a job in a game shop, at which point I owned every console possible. So yeah, that's kind of the geek credentials is cut me and I'll bleed pixels.
Well, you said you ended up working in retail as well. Like back then, Virgin were huge with video gaming and stuff. And what was it like then? Was it one of these big mega stores or?
It was Virgin Game Centre, again in Oxford, and it was one of the most exciting and brilliant times of my career. The people who worked there in that shop, we were a little family. And I got the job by pure luck, really. I'd been at college and I was aiming to be a marine biologist or work in marine biology. And the job I was after was going on a Greenpeace vessel and taking photograph of whale flukes, right? Because each whale fluke is individual. And Greenpeace offered me a position. I was like, brilliant, got a job with Greenpeace. This is great. And then they said, yeah, you need to raise £35,000, please. And I was like, hang on a minute, how does that work? You give me a job and I've got to pay you the money. So I kind of was a bit miffed about that and was walking through the Westgate Shopping Centre in Oxford, and someone was, at the moment I walked past, sticking up an advert in the window which said Saturday staff required. And it was in about November 91, and someone hadn't turned up for work. A new starter, and I wandered into the shop and asked to speak to the manager. I hadn't got prepared anything. I wasn't dressed up. And the manager kind of looked at me and was like, do you like games? I said, yeah. And he said, okay, let's come out the back for a chat. And we spent about 2 hours talking about Kickoff 2, Arsenal and Oxford United, at which point he gave me the job. And he said, yeah, I like you. You're a decent fella. And from there, that was it. I started off dusting shelves, trying to keep stock on the shelf, which over those Christmases, it was crazy to think how many Mega Drives we sold, how many copies of Sonic we sold, being involved in the Sonic Tuesday. And then you'd have days, I remember distinctly, like we got a PC in the back of the shop and PC gaming started to explode. And then Falcon 3.0 came into the store. And Alone in the Dark, and then X-Wing and Wing Commander, and it's kind of, I remember all of these kind of big events and big games, and all the cool stuff that was around. But Virgin was an absolutely amazing place to work. They absolutely got what video games was all about just back in the early 90s.
Well, you touched on like two strong memories that I've got of gaming then as well in stores. You mentioned Sonic Tuesday, and that was the first time I'd seen that kind of, we talked to Tom Kalinske on the show before and several people that were involved in that, and they were talking about how that was kind of the first kind of viral marketing campaign for video games, really, and that global launch. And then shortly after that, there was Mortal Monday as well with Mortal Kombat. Yep. I mean, have you got any memories of those events and what it was like, leading up to it?
Yes, Sonic Tuesday, I remember distinctly. The Sonic, I think the Mega Drive games came in boxes of 48, and we couldn't get enough deliveries. We were running people down to the kind of stockroom warehouse. The deliveries were coming in. I think Securicore at the time were doing the deliveries, and we were running the boxes upstairs as fast as we could because we couldn't keep them on the shelf quick enough, right? And we were running out of games and we were running out of Mega Drives. And I remember that Christmas, the manager of Virgin was we're out of Mega Drives, and it's like, what are we going to do? Because high ticket item, $129.99 it was at the time. We need some more Mega Drives. I know what I'll do. I'm going to go and talk to the manager of Dixon's because he doesn't know a lot about video games. I'm going to go and chat to him. So the manager went off and came back and kind of said, right, I need as many as you can. I've just bought for cash all of the Mega Drives out of Dixon's. So we went over to Dixon's and carried all these Mega Drives back and put them on the Virgin stock. And there's little things like that, which you wouldn't do these days because things are far more professional. And then like Mortal Monday, again, I remember Mortal Kombat coming out, and I think it might have been the SNES version. So it was a few months later. I don't think the SNES version shipped day and date. And Toys R Us at the time were doing a weird loyalty multi-buy discount. And it was a different manager, but he got in his car, drove down the Botley Road in Oxford to Toys R Us and bought all of their copies of Mortal Kombat and then brought them back to the shop. He'd bought them on a discount. No one else had any stock. There we go. I think it was $59.99 at the time. Boom, out the door. It's just really it kind of like Barrow Boy behaviour. But it was just phenomenal being part of these huge events. And as the 90s kind of flowed through, the other distinct memory I have was Road Blasters coming in on Mega CD, and we'd stick games behind the till and we'd have a play of them in the morning. And I remember seeing Road Blasters and just thinking, what, this is the next level, right? At the time, I think I was getting into work about 7. We'd open at 9 and I'd spend 2 hours sat behind the till playing Tetris or Wings on the Lynx. Right. And it was just these kind of things that we everybody in the shop was in early to play games because we loved it. And that love and passion for games, I noticed very quickly, that kind of knowledge of it really engaged with customers. And people would come in and say, oh, I've got Streets of Rage. I like it. What else is there? As they were looking at a huge range of 40, 50 Mega Drive games. And you'd be able to pick up Double Dragon or Street Fighter 2, which it's not as narrative, but it's more, it's combat. And I noticed really, really quickly that, oh, hang on a minute, this is a bit of a talent. And I know it sounds simple to your listeners. Of course, you've got game A and that goes with game B. But it wasn't something that retail, specifically video games retail, particularly had a lot of awareness of. And I seem to have quite a photographic memory of genres and games. And then kind of quite quickly, they got me onto buying for the shop, which I did pretty well at. I understood the local market, that Oxford didn't sell quite so many Spectrum games as they did in Liverpool. But we had different kind of customer base. It was very tech heavy. And I think I only made one bad decision, touch wood, which I overbought a Hagar the Horrible on the Amiga, and that still haunts me to today. That I bought 20 copies of that, and I think we never.
You've still got copies at home
somewhere. Yeah, they're somewhere. Yeah. I think we were the only place to buy them. But there's just little things like that, and I suppose the other mouth opening moment was I was in Milton Keynes, looking after that shop. I worked in Milton Keynes and Cheltenham, as well as Oxford and other places, and that's when the PlayStation Video came in, which I think it was Gorecki did the soundtrack of the music, and it was all about Toshinden and the T-Rex and Wipeout, and it was like the pre-roll of Hey, PlayStation's coming. And there was this clear seed change at that point of Sony were marketing differently video games, and people who were coming into the shop were different in their behavior after PlayStation. It was like they weren't kind of embarrassed to be buying stuff as an adult. They were much more confident to be buying video games as an adult. And it was like all these transitions across a really crazy time. Yeah, it was really, really entertaining. I think the worst thing about it was when, I think some of the retailers decided to create their own radio channels. And hey, it's Future Zone Radio and welcome to our store. But they weren't radio channels. They were 60-minute cassettes. And you would have to hear the same thing. Like over Christmas, it would drive you nuts. Absolutely.
Looping all day.
Oh my God. There are some songs, Oh Sit Down by James, I can never listen to ever again because of the amount of time it was kind of on repeat. But
you mentioned that rivalry there as well, because I remember even in my town we had Future Zone, which turned into Electronics Boutique. Yep. WH Smith was selling games. I think Our Price was selling games.
Well.
We had maybe Boots might still been doing it by then. We had 3 independent gaming shops as well. So I mean, what was kind of that rivalry like? Because I mean, it felt like there was a lot of places where you could get games from. Was it like a fierce rivalry?
Yeah, it was. We didn't like them. They didn't like us. We liked the indies, and we'd go and talk to the indies because the indies kind of knew that we liked games as well. But some of the Smiths and Boots and Dixons especially, they were the baddies. No one liked Dixons, right? And that was kind of it's fun rivalry to kind of think back now. There was never any nastiness with it, but you're always very pleased to have a customer come in and complain about one of the others. But we just tried to be a fun place. We allowed people to test games and play games, which I felt was very important. Was, people need to be confident about what they're buying. Back then, you were dropping 50 quid on something that was based on a review or a press ad. And, being able to put it on, we called them the Android, which was like a spider, big metallic spider in the middle of the shop, and give them 30 seconds or a couple of minutes to play the game, just became really, really important. People then gained confidence.
See, I love that on a Saturday you'd have all the kids in like game shops, and me and my friends, we spend all day in there, like just playing games that have systems set up, whereas now you go to somewhere like Game, it feels a bit sterile.
And they were cool as well. They had like you mentioned that big metal spider. They had crazy features in them. I remember the Virgin in Nottingham had these like tubes that you put messages in, and it would fire around the building.
Yeah, the whole megastore, Virgin, as I said at the top, Virgin really nailed it and they got it right. And I think what happened was Richard Branson wanted some more jumbo jets, so he sold Virgin game centres first off to WH Smith's R Price. That then got sold. We ended up at Future Zone, and Future Zone was such a horrific shock to the system. With Virgin, we had role-playing games as well, so Call of Cthulhu, Dungeons and Dragons, not just video games. We sold so much Scrabble and Monopoly and stuff at Christmas as well. It was all about games as entertainment. And then Future Zone kind of didn't want that. But then some very odd things started to happen, and we realised the Future Zone wasn't being operated with the player at mind, right? And there was one instance where we gave the front of the plinth over to some Psygnosis games, some Amiga Psygnosis games. I was at Cheltenham at the time, and I remember looking at this range of things, and it was like Walker and what's the game with an owl on you're the owl, and it's Agony, things like that. There was loads of the Psygnosis games, and we sold loads, and then the week after they all started coming back, and I was looking at it thinking every single one we've sold has come back. And this Psygnosis range had come in about a week before the business owners changed the refund policy. And the refund policy was no longer, you were no longer allowed to get a refund. You had to exchange for something else, right? Which I'm sure was illegal even then at the time. And it put the staff under a lot of pressure to kind of deal with angry customers. And then I realized all of this stuff we're selling is faulty, right? And then the rumor kind of came down from a top that, they'd done a deal with Psygnosis to buy a non-guaranteeable faulty stock off Psygnosis.
Oh, wow.
Sell it, and then make people exchange it for something else. And this was such a weird thing, which upset so many people within the kind of staffing of Future Zone, that a lot of people got very upset about the business and lost a bit of passion. We lost some key people, and that's when EB came along and picked up Future Zone. At that point, EB were all about mums, and it was selling the game to mums. So we need to make the stores friendly. We need to make them less nerdy. We need to make them kind of a little bit more professional, so we can entice parents in to buy games. Now that's great, and that's a good audience. But what happened there was then the likes of GameStation appeared, reaching out to that cool gamey audience again. GameStation did a good job of filling that kind of niche. So it's very, very challenging time having this very vibrant feeling like you're with your people with Virgin Game Centres, then that kind of changing into being a little bit more of a corporate entity, all about money. I learned a lot from it, but it wasn't the most pleasant place to work, put it that way.
You touched on the PlayStation launch as well, and what a big change that was in gaming. And I mean, that era was very... things were changing every 6 months. We felt like we went from Amiga and, Mega Drive and Super Nintendo via the Jaguar and the 3DO, all these weird consoles that came along, like, flash in the pan.
CDI came
Saturn,
out.
Yes. Yeah. CD32 was on the market for like 6 months. And then, Saturn was coming along, and the Super consoles, Jaguar. Yeah. I mean, it was a complicated time to be a video games player and kind of decide which console to back. Do you remember much of the buzz around the PlayStation? What kind of the feel was when that was coming out? Did people have confidence in it?
We'd have internal debates about the amount of space you'd give different consoles, and I think a lot of those debates helped those console wars get won and lost. Having Saturn, I remember Saturn being moved to the back of the store and PlayStation getting 3 bays, and that was like, okay, well, that's Saturn done for then. And I think Jurassic Park had just come out, or the trailer had dropped, and we'd started to have much more of a kind of cool marketing and trailers come in from Sony that would sit on the in-store TV, and you just get crowds of people sitting around watching those things. I think the marketing teams at the time were really switched on to this audience in game stores to watch things. There was a game called Epic, I think, which used Holst's Mars and the planets as its soundtrack, and it had a video of this kind of filled in polygon. It looked a bit Battlestar Galactica, a little bit Star Warsy, and they did an amazing job of selling the game, but the game didn't quite match what the video was. So you had these instances as well of people crowding around tellies watching the latest thing. But yeah, the buzz around PlayStation was crazy. And as I said, it kind of changed people into being a lot less embarrassed about buying games. We used to joke sometimes that you'd get someone coming in and they kind of wanted a paper bag to take the game out with. I don't know if that was the early 90s thing, that there was still a bit of it's still for kids, when a lot of adults...
Yeah, PlayStation felt cool though, didn't it? It was that clubbers audience and dance music.
They nailed it. Yeah. And it was the right thing as well, because we, as a generation, we'd grown up with Spectrum, with Commodore, with Amiga, and we were now ready for something a bit cool. And Sony made an absolutely pivotal decision for the success of our industry, which was making it more cool. Sega tried that with the Go Fast, I think it was Daytona ad where the guy's eyeballs fly out, and that was kind of cool. It was cool, but Sony came in and did even more cool. They were trying to be cool without being cool.
Yeah,
no, they weren't trying to be cool. They just were cool. There we go.
Yeah, they got that vibe completely right. And it's interesting that you talk about, the game releases and stuff, because you work for a company called Excitement Direct, and they were like dealing with imports as well, which imports were a really kind of shady area back then. I remember going to like independent stores and you'd see a lot of import machines and stuff and consoles before release and titles. And it was always kind of like, oh, they've appeared from a magical land far away.
Yeah, they were a very magical land far away, or very close by in some cases. So I left Future Zone and got a job with a mail order company out in the west of Oxford called Excitement Direct, and we specialised in importing and bringing in things like N64. I remember those coming in. I remember them being delivered from Japan, the N64 console with Pilot Wings. And I remember taking one home for the weekend and was just blown away by Mario and Pilot Wings, and just Blast Dozer as well. Amazing. Anyway, and we just kind of find a niche that, well, we're filling this hole that other people don't seem to be. We started shipping other games in, and we started shipping games from inside Europe into the UK, and then we started shipping some games from the UK into Europe when the currency kind of switched. But it was all filling a niche. Now Nintendo approached us and were a bit upset about the import business, and that managed to get us official Nintendo status. So when Nintendo 64 released in the UK, we grabbed a fairly significant market share because we were able to ship them out. The owners also were chatting to basically the way it worked is we went to E3 when it was at Atlanta and met a guy who was exporting out of LA, and he was selling us stuff. He'd send us over a fax and we'd tick off what we wanted, and 4 weeks later it'd turn up. And he got this new thing called Pokemon, and they were Pokemon plushes, and we managed to convince the owners to buy lots of these plushes. So we were selling Pokemon plushes online. At the time, this was mid-90s, and they were just doing huge things because we're the only place you could get them. You know, we seem to be right at the forefront of bringing those into the country. There's ourselves and Special Reserve and Gameplay, which was based in Yorkshire, who were kind of the three big mail order players at the time. Special Reserve's one I remember from, when I was buying games myself, I'd always go to Special Reserve because they seemed to have better prices. But it was all about the business then was all about buying in bulk. Could you buy in bulk, which lowered your cost and enabled you to undercut the retail stores who could not operate on the same level as you had because they had shrinkage and rent and other things. So that was kind of the way mail order worked.
It's interesting because mail order then moved into the online space, and you ended up working with Amazon.
Yeah, so a few years after.
What stage were they in at that point? Were they still just doing books? Or?
Yeah, they just started doing games. I think I was an employee about 1,000 and something, and it was in Slough, and this was early 2000, and I got a job with Amazon thanks to an industry veteran who was working, I think it might have been at Microprose or Hasbro at the time. He was a friend of mine, and he rang me up and said, Amazon are after a buyer, as it was then, and ended up at Amazon. And that was a really interesting place to work. Amazon has its issues as a corporation. I learned a lot about customers and behavior and data. And if you do things that customers like, they tend to come back. And that was something that kind of really cemented my decision-making and strategies is, let's just be nice to the player and the customer, and they'll tend to trust us. And Amazon was all about convenience. We did some things that were, I'm not sure other people in the industry kind of liked very much. And it was a bit of a free pass. Amazon didn't give us too much focus. I think they were very much focused on books at the time. They also didn't know too much about video games themselves. Jeff Bezos was a massive Halo fan, and I always knew to kind of, when he was passing, to chat to him about Halo. So that would always get you on side, and his entourage would always wonder, who the hell is this guy chatting to Jeff, and why is Jeff so excitable? But it was just kind of knowing, oh yeah, that's a thing.
I was wondering, as well, there were so many online retailers that kind of just fell and went with the .com crash.
Yeah.
And Amazon kept surviving. Why did you think that?
Well, it was Amazon starts with an A, and that's for a reason. It's it's won Amazon awards. We won a couple of Golden Joysticks Award for Retailer of the Year, and I'm convinced the only reason of that is because it was A, alphabetically at the top of the list, and who really gave a crap about a retailer when it came to the gold joysticks. So that was kind of my decision making, reasoning on that one. I mean, couldn't be big headed that it was down to us. But with Amazon, you had Jungle, you had a bunch of other retailers, Play.com, really throwing a lot of money at online retailing, and Amazon managed to stay the course. It invested a lot of money in other things, but we also made great strides within video games and kind of changed some things up that video games was kind of doing. We kind of challenged the status quo to change the way people were interacting with games and stuff like that. And it really, really did manage to stuck out. I've always said, though, Amazon has got the size it is despite itself, not because of it. I think it's just right time, right place. It's one of those things. It's got a home run fairly easily, and now it's going to be pretty impossible to knock it off the perch for any one other retailer.
And if you're starting a retail company, start it with the letter A.
Yeah, definitely.
The take away from that.
Yeah, Aardvark. That's it. There we go. And you wouldn't be surprised that there are some companies out there called Aardvark.
Yeah, I bet. Well, James, kind of moving forward a few years, because I mean, I want to get into some of the amazing stuff you worked on with Sega. Yeah. How did you end up working with them?
So Amazon I lost a little bit of the love for Amazon because as we moved forward, it became much more about data and less about the content. And I think Amazon itself became they were a little bit unsure about people who knew a lot about the product that they were working in. They felt you might make some wrong decisions. You weren't making data-driven decisions. So it just became a little bit misaligned with what Amazon were trying to do. Because I really wanted to get into the nitty-gritty about the product and what good games meant. And we're making great strides at Amazon. But I just had a really good relationship with Sega, and I saw an advertisement for product manager for a forthcoming title from Sports Interactive. And I loved the Sports Interactive guys, played for Football Manager to death. Back since Championship Manager, right? And got the role. And my role at Sega to start with was to bring Football Manager live to the world, and that was my first kind of role. Pretty quickly, Sega was changing, and Sega had come off the back of a pretty turbulent time resetting after it decided to not do consoles anymore, and was kind of finding its way. And I remember one of the IT guys coming up to me and saying, look, I've got to do this thing called Steam, and you've sold stuff online. Do you fancy doing it for me? And from then I kind of took on Steam and this was 2007, and then started to realize that, hey, this is a really interesting outlet. And my kind of role transitioned from when Football Manager Live shut down as a service into fully embracing the digital world, working with OnLive, working with Gaikai, and right up until the point I left, we were just trying to figure out with all of the studios what was the best way of delivering content to players, that the players had the best time they possibly could with the games. So it was a really lovely, lovely time. I loved every minute of my experiences at Sega.
Well, interestingly, you mentioned Steam there, because that opened up like a lot of extra models for stuff like updates and DLC and stuff like that hadn't been considered. Was this like an extra thing that you mentioned to Sega and kind of got them a bit involved and realised they could add some longevity into their titles?
Yeah, when I was back at Amazon, we were in this kind of war with the other retailers, the physical retailers, on how do we make our version of the game different to your version of the game? And GameStation and the likes, they were looking at T-shirts, or they were looking at stickers or pens or anything that they could put with the game. And we were thinking, well, we can't do that. It's going to up our costs. We haven't got the storage. We want to keep super lean. And I asked one of the team, I think it was Sims, and I said to them, can you carve out a piece of content that we can give away on an email? So it's a digital version of something. And we ended up getting a pink pug. So if you bought The Sims from Amazon, you got a pink pug. It's just a color change. There was no other difference. And people went nuts for it. And we did the same thing with Lego Star Wars, where we unlocked one of the characters via email. So you bought the game was delivered. And then the day before or the day of the game being delivered, you got a piece of content, which you just added your code in and you unlocked it. With Sega, I was looking at Total War specifically and working with CA, amazing developer, and they had Total War Empire just ship, and there was loads of DLC in the plan for that, and we just collaborated on what was the best way to bring out additional content. Now, a lot of people will think, DLC, oh, this is really bad. You're carving out our game. Why don't you give it to us in all at once? If I pay you 50 quid, I want the whole game. Why are you cutting it out into DLC? And the answer for that is really pretty obvious. It's like, we've developed the game up to this point. We need to now pay for more developers or developers to come back to the project to make the thing that we want to make as DLC. But we kind of don't know what you lot want as players. So we need to get the game released so we can see what you like. So then we can start unlocking DLC. The strategy will be, okay, the first 2 pieces of DLC will roughly know this is what it's going to be. But after that, we're going to be directed and driven by players. And you release a piece of DLC, great. That gives you another little bump on Steam, great, which grows your sales. And it just becomes this kind of really interesting ecosystem. And I think the kind of negativity around DLC has died off. I remember early in the 2010s, you would still kind of wince when you hear a publisher has shipped a piece of content physically with code blocked off behind a paywall, which you'd then have to buy later. That was kind of like, well, but it's not doing what the player wants. Don't do it. That's bad practice. And we learned a lot about that. We learned a lot about that in DLC. And it wasn't something, if you look at Sega's catalogue, Sega certainly doesn't hammer DLC. It was always, I felt, done super respectfully of the player.
Well, you mentioned about, Sega's catalogue there, and they've got an incredible back catalogue. I mean, as retro gamers, Sega's like one of the holy grails. Yep. I mean, was there a focus to kind of look back at the kind of retro titles then and revive some of them? How did you decide kind of what to bring back, and did you kind of assess what was there? Yeah,
so Japan were very nervous about going back and looking at older games. We had 1,016, I think, old IP and licenses which you could look at, some of which were locked out because of legal disputes or disputes with this, or they just don't know who owns the font for the game or the music. There were so many different things. And I think the first time we really looked at retro was Mega Drive. And I got some producers together, and they kicked off a project where we released some Mega Drive games on Steam. And it was the Mega Drive, I think it was Series 1, and it was about 5 Mega Drive games. We sold them, may even be for $7.99 at the time. And I remember Japan contacting me the day after the launch, being very upset that they hadn't sold very well. And I said, well, we've got 7 of these coming out, 7 series. Judge me when they're all out, because I've got a plan. And we released these series of games over about a year, and at the end ran a promotion. And I also ran the promotion on the front page of Amazon, which was, I think, buy 80 Mega Drive games for $9.99 or $14.99. Sega sold millions of Mega Drive games on PC now. And we also revisited them and created Steam Workshop elements so people can put ROMs up and fix things and play with things. And it was looking at retro in such a way that, how do we differ from all of the main ROMs? Because if a collector wants a Mega Drive ROM, you just know where to point your mouse and you can go and find one. But how do we make it better, right? And those were the kind of things that we needed to do. Pushed hard on things like Shenmue. Bayonetta was a wonderful success. Typing of the Dead Overkill was one of mine. It's those kind of things we just managed to convince the powers that be. And the more success we had, the more they were into it. Bayonetta, for example, sold its full forecast in about 24 hours, which was pretty phenomenal. Wow. But we were kind of told Bayonetta, it was out on PlayStation and Xbox, it was worth £10 in the bargain bins. But I could see a lot of people wanted the game and there was interest on PC. And we put up a game on April Fool's Day, which was a version of Bayonetta with Flappy Bird. And it was kind of like 8-bit Bayo. And the audience went nuts, like, you're trolling a Sega, what are you doing? But within the achievement images, we'd put in an ASCII code, and you could link all the achievement images together, and it gave you a URL in the ASCII code to a website. You went to the website and it had Bayonetta's shoe and a countdown clock. And when that countdown clock reached 0, we put the game up on Steam. And people went crazy because folks on Reddit found it and they were like, I'm the Sherlock Holmes of the video games world. I found this thing. And they felt so special. We loved it because it was so much fun doing that with players. And we also launched Vanquish in the same way. We updated Bayonetta a few months later with a little tiny avatar image for Steam of the character from Vanquish. And when you put an update on Steam, someone's decompiled it before it's even finished downloading. And because this was only 29K or something, it had already been pulled out and people are like, holy moly, it's happening. And it's those kind of things we really like to play with at Sega. Yeah, just engage with the audience and don't be boring about it. We're an entertainment industry. Gamers love gamers, and let's prove to people that we do.
If we're talking about, classic Sega titles that have kind of found, always had love, but actually in the last decade, I'd say really found that retro audience and fell in love with it all over again, is obviously Sonic. And, I'm definitely going to ask about Sonic Mania and Sonic Generations, but I mean, it kind of had a bit of a strained relationship with some of the 3D titles. I mean, infamously the 2006 Sonic the Hedgehog game wasn't much of a fan favourite. Nope. I love Sonic Colors, I enjoyed that game on the Wii, but then when Sonic the Hedgehog 4 came along, I think I had that on the Ouya.
Yeah.
And obviously that was a return, on a console that you could play on your TV. It was on Xbox as well and PlayStation of 2D Sonic. So was it kind of a conscious effort to kind of take Sonic back to its roots?
Yeah, so at that point, the console division was being operated out of San Francisco, and they'd concepted and did Sonic 4. And Sonic was always a game that was either operated out of the UK or out of the States, and I think at that point it was being operated out of the US. The best thing to happen for Sonic wasn't just Generations, but also the racing games. They were phenomenal. Yeah. And brought a lot of people into the ecosystem, and then also being respectful to the fans of Sonic. And there's nothing as crazy as Sonic fans and passionate as Sonic fans. Doing things like Summer of Sonic, embracing the community, getting the right community people to talk to the community, building towards Mania. And Mania was the point we really knew this is a beautiful thing. Folks, an absolutely beautiful thing.
Well, let's talk about Sonic Generations. I mean, that was an incredible game, and that was a real celebration of, 20 years of Sonic. And around that time, I mean, the modding scene was really strong. A lot of homebrew kind of Sonic games were coming out as well. Tell us a bit about the background of that game from your recollection then, because, I mean, it kind of mashed together the best of 3D Sonic and 2D Sonic, didn't it? And was Sega expecting it to do as well as it did?
Yeah, you've hit the nail on the head.
Between the worlds, yeah.
You've hit the nail on the head. The people who really loved the 3D Sonic game really loved it. The people who hated the 3D Sonic game really hated it. Everybody kind of liked 2D Sonic. So it was, okay, how do we take the best bits out of the 3D version? I didn't have a great deal to do with it at all. I remember being presented it and sitting down thinking, oh, we're doing Sonic properly. This is great. And it just really resonated. It did really well on PC. I think my discussion within Sega at the time was about bringing it to PC as well, and not just doing a port. We needed to make it from the PC. I suppose that argument or discussion was one when you'd fly to Tokyo and you talk to the folks in Japan. PC to them was a bit confusing mid 2010s. They didn't really understand the importance of things like anti-aliasing, VSync and adjustable resolution. You know, you needed to work all these things in to make sure that the people who really cared about the quality of the game on the PC felt rewarded. I remember one of the first games I worked on, and it just was kind of like a head slap moment, was Vancouver, 2008 or 2010. It was the PC version, and the PC version, it had a picture of the Xbox controller and it said press A to continue, and it was flashing up on the Xbox controller. And I remember getting a customer service contact, and the customer was unable to progress because they were pressing A on their keyboard and it wasn't doing anything. And it was like one of those moments that, well, of course people don't think like us. We think we know everything because we're here at every single time. We know all about games. We know about controllers. We know what that means. So we need to kind of make sure our games are built for people and the platforms they're going to be playing with. And Sega really embraced PC at that moment. They really embraced it. It was like there's this big sea change over in Japan, and there's a lot of love for things like Valkyria Chronicles and some of the PC games that you've seen since then. Probably every PC game from now onwards will be super focused for Sega and Atlas as well. You know, I was there just at the end of the Atlas transition, so Persona and those kind of games, being involved very early on and meeting with Atlas devs and business folk, and just, you know, reiterating, don't forget about PC as a platform. Those were the kind of battles we had to fight. I call them battles. They weren't. It's video games. It's never a battle.
I think like that those fans modifying versions of games, and you know, forever they were always making Sonic ROM hacks and stuff. And Christian Whitehead was like one of the totally amazing developers for that. How did he end up getting involved with Sega, and then I think Sonic Mania coming around?
I think Sega approached him, which was what we were doing at the time. Sega had a very different attitude to user-generated content to others, and Sega kind of embraced it, both on the kind of YouTube streaming as well as modded content. And as long as it fell within the rules and remit of what's decent and good, we would allow it to happen. So I believe Christian was approached, and it was a cracking idea for that.
One question that you might be able to answer, because, you know, it's always been fan rumors and fan dreams. You know, you see it all the time. The amount of news stories we've seen, like, you know, Dreamcast 2 is coming out one day. What was kind of the feeling inside Sega in terms?
Oh, we so wanted to play with that, but it was one of the ones that we felt it was disrespectful to our fans. There was so many like April Fool jokes, or can we call this Dreamcast 2? You know, we've got a sense of humor. From Sega's point of view, it's a publisher of video game content. And as much as people would love to kind of think otherwise, the world has moved on and it's streaming technology. Could you see a Sega piece of hardware? Of course you can, right? Sega do things. We've had the Sega Mega Drive Minis, and we've had the arcade division outputs hardware. But Dreamcast 2 was always one of those things. And you have to be kind of careful of in jokes and laying things, because sometimes the joke doesn't land. As I found to my it became not much of an issue, but it was a bit of another one of these grimacy things when I was back at Amazon with a game that I could see people debating and wondering what it was, and it was just an in joke, and I never owned up to it. So it was a bit of I'm sorry, everybody. There was a game called Monkfut, Monkfut, and it was listed as PlayStation 2, and some friends and I had a very silly sense of humor, and we just came up with a name that we found funny, and I think it was like around the Fast Show and things like that. And one of my friends' nicknames was Monkfut, Monkfut, right? And I put it up on Amazon as a PlayStation 2 game to kind of take the mick out of him, and sent him the link, like, ha ha ha, look at you. Forgot to take it down. and then found it on a Reddit post about missing games, and then finding some more people back in the 2009 era. I think there's some websites still up, but certainly a lot of them have come down now, with forums with people discussing what type of game it could be, and someone from Sony getting asked about it and denying all knowledge, and it's like the secret project. Like, oh, I'm so sorry, it was just a silly joke.
And I bet there's some guys on Twitter who are like, yeah, I worked on that.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah. Could keep it going, right? We could cut that last bit, and just between us, we know, and we could start maybe eking out some fake screenshots or something.
Well, thank you for coming clean after all this time, James.
Stop looking for copies of Monkfoot.
Yeah. Or put them up on eBay. You know, I'm sure we can cobble something together. It wasn't the worst thing I did at Amazon in terms of the industry getting cross with me. Put it that way. No one in the industry got cross with me over Monkfoot. Take-Two did get a little bit cross with me one year, because we hit New Year's Day. We'd come in, I think it was coming up to San Andreas, but San Andreas wasn't announced, wasn't even a thing, it was a rumor, right? But we started to hear that, look, there's definitely another Grand Theft Auto coming. Vice City had been absolutely enormous at this stage. And I kind of put a guess together, and I thought, Grand Theft Auto is going to come out in the next year. I'm going to put a product page up on Amazon and call it Grand Theft Auto brackets next version or next edition. And in the product description, it said, don't know when this is coming out. Don't know how much it's going to be, but it's putting it up here at $39.99 or $49.99. You'll guarantee a copy if you order it, right? And because people don't get charged, their credit card doesn't get charged at the point of ordering, it gets charged when the game dispatches. I thought, well, this is kind of fine. So jumping the bit of a gun here, but no one in the retail store can do that. So let's go ahead and do that and just see what interest comes. And Take-Two sales guys rung me up fairly quickly, very hot under the collar, that I'd kind of spoilt their launch, and nobody had said anything. And my response was, well, it's rumoured everywhere. Everywhere's talking about it. We know you're working on it. You've said you're working on it. What do you want me to do? And they said, well, can you cancel all your orders, please? And I said, okay, I'll cancel all 130,000 of them. At which point they asked me not to cancel 130,000 orders.
I bet.
And we had a rather wonderful time with San Andreas, but it was just little things like that. Now I think back at them and put my kind of hand of shame over my forehead and think, what was I thinking? Right? Just what must I have been like? My name must have been mud to these, to all the poor people putting together launch plans and marketing plans. And there was me doing something ridiculous like that. However, I don't think it affected San Andreas too much.
No, that did quite well.
Yeah.
Well, you ended up starting Secret Mode, which is an awesome company. Like, Zul Reed, I mentioned, we were all over that, and it's fantastic. Why did you end up starting this?
Yeah, so I kind of left Sega. Things were being things at Sega. It's not that it was generating a home run every time, but it was fairly standard on how to kind of launch games. I really wanted to get into the indie space and work with some different things, and you just get that kind of. It'd been 13 years, and I'd loved every minute of it. And Sumar and I had discussions, and they mentioned they were talking about a potential publishing division with Sumo. And I left Sega and started with Sumo with a blank piece of paper. What do you call a publisher? How do you start a publisher? How do you get games? How do you produce them? How do you market them? And I had to get everything down on bits of paper and kind of listened into you folks and heard lots of hints and tips on what not to do. And we have come up with a publisher that we think encapsulates and really delivers all of our values, which is about quality and player happiness and inclusion and real fairness. We've had an amazing couple of years. It's not been easy with the pandemic and the financial crisis and other things like that. But for us to launch Zool as our first game and see the kind of player feedback on that, and then to continue to smash it out the park when it comes to Steam reviews, it's been phenomenal. You know, Eternal Threads winning Tiger Puzzle Game of the Year and having 10 out of 10 ratings in a lot of the press. Wobble Dogs has been consistently 98% user reviewed, and A Little to the Left, which has eclipsed 100,000 units since it came out in the back end of November. It's just been a really wonderful time, which has been kind of a reward of that focus of ours of let's build something where we can ensure that the quality of the game matches people's expectations, not just from a price point of view, but from a marketing point of view. And it's just been a brilliant journey. Zool was one of the first things I came across because of Sumo's connections with Gremlin. Sumo, Ian Stewart, who owns the rights to Zool, we had a conversation with that very early on, and Sumo Academy needed a project, and I said, "Well, you build it, we'll sell it. It's you know, what great idea this is." And rather than them creating a version of Zool that I'd seen before, or let's say that another developer might have taken it, the students at Sumo Academy kind of disassembled it and rebuilt it up for modern screens. So they expanded the play area. They changed the difficulty slightly. So the original version of Zool, if you want to play it, is in there, minus the lollies, but that's a different subject. And the way the Academy built that and brought out a really lovely homage to Zool was great, and it was a really nice starting point. Taught us a lot. Really,
and it was nice to see Zool coming back as well, because I mean, I love Zool on the Amiga. You know, back in the early 90s, I remember that being like, they were even advertising it as like, you know, the Sonic the Hedgehog killer.
Yeah.
So you know, it was great to see that game coming back and being reintroduced for a new audience. And I love the upgraded graphics and the bigger play field. So I really enjoyed the way that Zool Redimension played.
Yeah,
I mean,
thank you.
are there any plans? Yeah, are there any plans to bring back like any other classics from back in the day that maybe some other Gremlin games?
Not directly. There may well be Zool coming, more Zool, to other platforms.
Zool 2?
But I'm not going to confirm anything or deny anything. Right. But I haven't cleared it with my wonderful PR team.
Fair enough.
But Zool on another platform, I wouldn't be surprised if I was a fan to see that appear, and maybe some more content for the PC one as well. We may have thought about some new cool things to add free to everybody who's already bought it.
So is there anything you can tell us about this coming up at Secret Mode then? Anything we should look out for over the next couple of months?
We've got some really interesting announces happening over the first half of this year. And we're going to be looking at console versions of Eternal Threads are coming out this year. And that is just an amazing game built by Cosmonaut Studios up in Liverpool. It's probably not had the exposure it deserves, but it's, as I said, Tiger Puzzle Game of the Year, or a brilliant PC game, 10 out of 10. Quite a lot of game journos said it was their game of the year, and that's really nice to bring that to console. And yeah, there's probably no announces that I can make right now, but if you'd have me back for 5 minutes, I can tell you about them directly.
100%. Well, obviously we'll link up your website and your socials in the show notes as well. If people want to keep an eye on it that way too. So yeah, best of luck with 2023, a really exciting company and exciting titles that it sounds like you're working on, James, and we look forward to hearing more when you can tell us.
Yeah, thank you very much. I look forward to hearing more wonderful guests on the podcast.